it's ego basically that blocks those receptors. I mean, I'm talking just as an example. So because I myself believe that romance doesn't die. So am I right about this? About that action? Because if you say that towards when you get older with your partner, you can retrieve those feelings. It doesn't. It's because romance has like different levels. It doesn't always have to mean intense feelings, love, whatever you feel. But I myself don't agree to the concept that it dies, because I just feel it's like an energy that just changed the form, but it really doesn't die. So, what's your opinion about this?
I like your theory. It will be interesting to see, what we learn about the physiology of what's actually happening there. Probably we will, because there's so much work being done on this now. My own theory, in a physiological sense around this, is having to do with the brain and our neural connections. That I think this way around sex, because it's very interesting. We think of sex as a basic and primitive drive, but for human beings it can become much, much more than that. If we integrate the sexual circuitry with the romantic circuitry, with the attachment circuitry, there's more happening. We're still having sex, but it's been ennobled and taken to higher levels. And there's a very famous sex therapist in the United States who's written on this. He's also a marriage therapist. And he says that sex in humans develops as you get older. And he says the best sex is had when we move into our 40s and 50s. Now, hormonally, it doesn't make any sense, okay? Because the sex hormones are in great decline by that time, okay? But as many sex therapists say, our primary sex organ is our brain. And the more connections we make, the richer the experience. And this sex therapist says, this kind of sex is not for young people at all. They can't have it. The maturity is not there. Maturity, I think, is a lot of these connections that we make when we do the work with each other.
And interestingly, the statistics show that the happiest, the most satisfied people in their sex life are the married, middle-aged, religious people in the States, which is very interesting.
This was a very big study that was written about in sex in America.
So the most satisfied.
So a very huge, broad study was done on the sex life of people in America. And one of the very interesting findings for many people was that the most satisfied group sexually were the evangelical Christians who were married in the United States. They had the best sex life.
Yeah, maybe it's that because they learn to satisfy, because they tell themselves that this is what I satisfy. You know what I mean? It's just like sometimes, I don't know whether you like this thing or you don't like this thing, but you tell yourself that this is what I like. So this is what I satisfy, you know what I mean? Probably this is not the best sex I ever have, but I'm happy with it, I'm satisfied with it, and I'm keep telling myself that this is what I satisfy. And if you're gonna ask me, I'm gonna say, this is the best sex life I ever have. Because this is what I believe, that this is the best sex life. And people that are religious, tend to satisfy with their life and their families and such. And that's why.
That's how they feel.
But then happiness is always subjective.
Yes, that's what I said. That kind of happiness is always subject to your belief.
I tend to think that it's partly because of the sexual revolution, people opened up about sex in the West. This is one of the things that the sexual revolution did. want more, talk about it more, and even in conservative religious circles, this sociological phenomenon had its influence and effect. So you add this openness, this new openness around sexual experience to more solid, committed relationships, and it seems to be a good mix.
So since you mentioned before the possibilities of falling in love with someone who, on whom we project the image of our parents. Now, knowing all the bad things in the person, do you still suggest to marry the person, or is it suggested to wait for someone else?
Find another candidate that you can
That's from the employment section.
Okay, this is a good question, and this is for any of you who are single. I mean, this is a more relevant question. Who should you find? Who should you look for? What should you look for in a partner? And that's what my book is about. And this is what and the reason why I wrote this book, by the way, was because of this question which I brought up at the beginning of my talk. Why? What happens to people who fall in love, rapturous love, and a few years later they're at each other's necks? What happens there? Did they choose the wrong person? And this is a big question. Did you choose the wrong person? What these latest theories is strongly suggesting is that we don't choose the wrong person when we fall in love. But there is something that you have to, I believe, find in a potential partner. The most critical thing is the willingness and determination to do the work when the going gets tough. Right? To stay with it. Right? If you've had a very troubled childhood, for example, there's different degrees of troubled childhood, right? There are some of us who have been abused terribly as children. There's some of us who basically had a pretty good upbringing, but we're still hurt in that process. So there's all kinds of degrees. We all deserve to have a partner. It doesn't matter where we've come from. We all yearn to have a partner, and we all deserve to find one. But if we've had a very troubled childhood, there's going to be deeper and heavier work to do in our marriage. Because those issues will come up in the marriage. That is for sure. All right? It's also most likely that you'll probably be attracted to somebody who had an almost equally troubled childhood. That is usual. Strange as it sounds, it's quite usual. So what do you do with all of this? Well, you decide to do the work. Whether it's more or less, I'm going to do it. To recognize that's what marriage is about. It's not the romance, okay? The romance, once we're in it, it seduces us to want to be married. But we should ideally try to find somebody while we're still awake, while our cortex is still functioning, that looks at the person and talks with them and tries to see, do they have this quality? Do they have this knowledge that this is what marriage is? It's not just about this temporary magic that we've fallen into a romance. There's much more to be done.
Just last question. So it's a bit of a loaded question, actually. So your work has involved working together with couples to help them improve their relationship and stay together. Has there ever been an instance where you encouraged separation, or would there, do you have any scenario where you would actually suggest encourage separation or divorce?
There might be some cases where some temporary separation could be helpful. If there's heavy intensity and so far the couple or the individuals have not developed this ability to self-soothe, to self-regulate enough to enter into a peaceful dialogue, which is something that we try to help couples to do all the time. This is the healing work. Okay? So we start with couples by making it safe. And so we don't have these drama scenes. We get the right way to move into feeling safe with each other and bringing up the issues. Right? And we've managed to be able to do that with pretty much everyone, but there may be cases where it's okay, let's prepare these as individuals first for a while. About divorce, which is a much bigger question, we haven't run into that where we would say you guys are wrong for each other or you're not completely incapable of having a partner. But there may be people who just don't have that capacity to be a partner.
And are not willing to do the work.
Yeah.
So there are cases where one is not really willing to do the work, and there's nothing we can do. That's why we often say in conscious courtship to really look for someone who's willing to do the work. That is the most important quality to look for, because almost everything else